Alright, spoiler warning. I'm gonna be talking about some of the things Hellblade does past the first couple hours, and I'm gonna be showing some footage of various bits of the game. I really kind of strongly encourage you to go into Hellblade as blind as possible. So if you haven't beaten it yet and you want to experience this experimental game in the best way possible, then do yourself a favor and save this video to your watch later list. Just come back later. All right? Cool. That's the only spoiler warning you get. It's kind of funny to me that just last week I talked about how Bloodborne has a boss that perfectly screws with the player to embody the game's themes of insanity, and now here I am talking about a game that every single chance it gets screws with the player, and in its entirety is crafted to exemplify various types of psychosis at every step of its 7-ish hour campaign. And you know, it does it far more effectively than many other games that have tried to do this kind of thing before. Let's get this tidbit out of the way really quick. Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice is a game that you're either gonna love or hate. There isn't really a middle ground here, not in my mind. It's a flawed work of art that experiments in everything it does, succeeding in some aspects and, not in others. The point of me being here isn't to tell you whether it's Game of the Year or to review it. We're here to talk about how Hellblade takes the ideas I talked about in my Bloodborne video last week and kind of runs with them, backed up by thoughtful research, careful consideration, and input from some pretty impressive sources. See, when we get down to it, mental illness has been an incredibly touchy subject for a really long time. And you could argue that because of how young games are as a medium, it's even more touchy and harder to tackle appropriately. Often, representations of people who struggle with one problem of the mind or another are seen to miss the mark by those with experience in the matter, and it's not too surprising considering how brushed under the rug discussion of mental illness is. The team at Ninja Theory, the creators of Hellblade, are acutely aware of this, and as they said in their dev diaries and video featurettes, the team was dedicated to making sure they brought to life the grittiest and realest representation of its subject matter. They brought in mental health specialists and people who are on the road to recovery, all to make sure that they were on the right path towards creating an experience that accurately represented their struggles and even simulated some of the experiences common amongst patients. As flawed as the game may be in parts, everything it does serves a purpose, and there's this constant bending of the fourth wall, and in some cases, basic game design rules that screws with the player as well as Senua in some pretty incredible ways. And, that's what we're gonna talk about. Alright, first things first. Hellblade doesn't give you any kind of combat tutorial. It doesn't tell you how to attack, block, dodge, guard break, or even that you can do all sorts of fancy moves and combos. When your first combat encounter starts, out of nowhere, by the way, it tosses you into a panic. Not just because, you know, you're suddenly fighting, but also because you don't really know what you can do or how to do it. Most people who are going to play this game will have an easy enough time figuring out the controls and mechanics, because, you know, games obey pretty common rule sets for designing button systems. But even then, those brief moments of, oh fuck, what do I do, are very real. It's one of the ways Hellblade gets the player to kind of get into Senua's boots. And in a way, it also serves as an analog to the idea of getting a grip on things, forcing the player to deal with some panic and then get themselves level-headed if they want to have any hope. Hell, this whole first combat encounter is pretty brilliant. It kicks off right after some crazy shit happens to your arm, and towards the end of the encounter, some enemies spawn that you can't actually hurt. Yeah, it forces you to lose an encounter, but it does it in a way that feels organic. Hellblade takes this opportunity and the old hat kind of game design idea that it's using to let you know exactly what you're dealing with. Just what that nasty shit on your arm is. It's called rot, and according to some of the only direct text in Hellblade, each time you die, the rot will grow. If it reaches your head, you'll lose all your progress. The implication here, for those not quite on the page yet, is that your save is gonna get fucking deleted if you suck ass at this game. The whole purpose of this system is to get the player more invested in what's going on. It may feel like a bit of a cheap sucker punch, but what it does is add some very real chaos and some very real chance that you could lose all your progress. The further you get into the game, the heavier that burden gets because you've made so much progress. This system works fantastically at doing what it wants to do. And here's an extra fun little tidbit. It might not even be a functional fucking system. That's right! Bluff! PC Games Network actually went and tested it, and they found that after 50 deaths, nothing had happened. Instead, it looked like each time you die, it just replays the last rot growth you had, and how much rot you actually have is determined by your progress through the game. And you know what? That's fucking awesome! I love this kind of shit! The fact that Hellblade just flat out lies to the player just drives that point forward, drives the idea that they're going for here. It's especially fun because there are people reporting that it does in fact delete your save, but we can't prove whether or not they're lying. The conflicting info out there on the internet makes it even more of a stuck landing, because now as you're playing, you're gonna be questioning yourself and constantly worried, but not worried, but kind of worried that you're gonna lose all your progress. That's the same kind of doubt and confusion that Ninja Theory was wanting you to have by adding this system. One of the most known symptoms of psychosis is hallucination, so it kinda goes without saying that Hellblade would have some audiovisual dickery. There are a few types of hallucinations that you'll encounter. There's visual and audio, and then for both of these there are subtle and in-your-face varieties. When it comes to visual, one of its subtle tricks is actually one of the coolest things in Hellblade. It's during one of the first sections, as you're making your way through the illusions on your way to Valravn, the illusion bird guy. It's pretty subtle, and I seriously didn't notice them at first, but there are human eyes pattering the environment. I was so unsure if I was seeing something that was actually there or not that I actually had to stop working through the area, go up to where I saw some, and just watch to make sure I knew what I was looking at. I wouldn't at all be surprised if there were more instances of stuff like this throughout the entire damn game, purely because those eyes were hidden so well, at least to me. I was so focused on the path in front of me and on making progress that it almost seemed like a trick of my vision, like when you're looking at something and you see something move out of the corner of your eye, and it threw me off in what I can imagine is the exact way they wanted it to. On the less subtle side of visual mirages, we have the floaty rune images that'll be everywhere when you're doing one of the rune puzzles. I really don't like these. I mean, they work, and they work okay, but these floaty-ass glowy things all up in my face feel like one of the only things in Hellblade that was designed gameplay first. With the puzzles themselves coming from the idea that Senua feels like she needs to find the meaning in shapes and symbols around her, even when there isn't any meaning, the puzzles themselves work well. I just feel that the floaty red hints, they stick out like a sore thumb and are really there just for function. They could have done something so much better than this. In fact, there just so happens to be an in-your-face hallucination that blows these things out the water. The Beast boss fight is one of the most intense fights in Hellblade. Thanks to the build-up and the actual design of the fight, the way the area shrinks, the Beast hides, its attack patterns, and the way the focus mechanic is used, all make this an incredibly strong fight. Then it kind of just throws a curveball at you. During the very last leg of the fight, shit hits the fan and bright red images flash onto the screen, typically when the Beast is attacking. You're already in a bit of a panic because the fight's been going on for a while, you're tired, the boss is a little erratic, and you're running out of space. The Beast rears up for an attack, and BAM! Whoa, what the fuck was that? It's the perfect mix-up at the end of a long encounter, and it genuinely freaked me out when it started happening. Like I mentioned, there are also some audio hallucinations going on. Things are a bit less varied here, since it's all pretty much just voices talking in your ears, but what gives it its oomph is the binaural microphones that were used to record these. See, binaural mics are these weird things here, human ears on sticks. Because of how they're shaped, and the audio they capture will kind of play back exactly how a human ear would hear it. And when you put your headphones on and sit down to play Hellblade, these voices sound like they're in your head.
Why is she waiting?
Open the gate. Open the gate. No, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Don't open the gate. Don't.
She's done it.
These disembodied voices will warn the player of danger during fights, give the player very loose hints, and at times flat out lie to and discourage the player. There are also some noises just tossed in, groans, whines, screams, all sorts of awful and weird sounds right inside your head. While it's one simple thing, it's used in such a clever and impressive way that it doesn't become grating or samey. I've seen some people complain about the voices online, that they're annoying, which to me kinda seems like it's almost one of the points. Nobody wants to have voices in their head, so of course some people are gonna find them annoying. The relationship that the player forms with the voices, how you feel about these characters talking talking in your head also kind of forms your relationship with Senua herself, and with the game as a whole. Out of everything that's done with the voices though, I think the best thing they do is make them silent. There are moments in the game, brief respites or respites, after you finish a section or get through something incredibly tense, where these voices just aren't there. You're left with your thoughts in an unfiltered, often sunny and colorful view of wherever it is you are. It's a really great way to show that Senua's in control, at least for the moment, with the added bonus of still being kind of unnerving. You've been hearing these voices constantly for so long that it's actually more uncomfortable for them to just not be there. Senua and the player should have the same emotions towards these voices, the same feelings and perceptions, and because of how well done it's all done, the player and Senua often do share these thoughts. That's all kind of helped by the player projecting their feelings onto the character, but hey, what do I know? I'm just talking about mechanics and the way it sounds cool. Styling an object differently or lighting it in a way that accents it is used to draw the player's attention to it, or to make it feel out of place. This is done all over gaming. You can do this subtly by changing some materials on it, or not so subtly by changing everything about its art style. Hellblade takes a bit of an extreme for named characters other than Senua. The people we see in her memories, flashbacks, and some hallucinations are all shot using full motion video. They dress actors up, do their makeup, and toss them in front of a green screen with some lighting done, and they film them acting out their lines. This ends up making these characters seem like they're from another world. They're so strange lit and they're slightly see-through. These characters are either the most clear things in Senua's mind or the most twisted. At first, I couldn't tell if Druth, the first character shot using FMV that you encounter, was actually FMV. It's difficult to tell because of the lighting and the graininess and how they do everything. It's really fucking good job, guys. I ended up focusing more on how he looked and the fact that he was so out of place than what he was saying. Talking about things, during a number of cutscenes, the camera will take on the role of a character that Senua is interacting with, and she will look directly at it and make eye contact with the player. Games don't really do this. It's almost like an unspoken rule that the character just always ignores the player because the player is the character. Having Senua talk to you, or at you, I guess, gets you more involved in the story. It places you very deliberately and suddenly into the world, in an entirely different position than a player's ever really been in any game before. When she's making eye contact with the player and talking to whatever character, it's a little unnerving. It happens sparingly enough that you'll never really get used to it, and it's always this weird experience. Around halfway through Hellblade, you find yourself in a maze. Just this underground labyrinth of tunnels with this really creepy moaning echoing throughout. After a bit of wandering, you enter this Legend of Zelda Lost Woods style looping area, and you have to move down the correct path in order to actually make progress. There's no warning or heads up that this is gonna happen, and you only find out that you're in a loop because you kinda realize it yourself. Nothing in here tells you, you just stop making progress for a little while. What blows me away about this section is that it's entirely seamless and incredibly detailed. Any other time I've seen this done, there's been some form of door that opens and closes behind you, or screen transitions, or a tunnel that you fade through. Here it just kinda happens, and you can even turn around and walk back out of the loop, though that's not the solution. It's done incredibly well, and is as confusing as it could possibly be, while also still being seamless and not really frustrating if you pay attention. There's a lot going on in Hellblade, from surface level screwing with the player all the way to fantastic symbolism, researched representation of mental illness, and a story and character that many who play will be able to relate to in one way or another. Through and through, it's a creative and beautifully done experiment of a game that says what it wants to extremely well thanks to its mechanics, tricks, and overall design. It's a game that proves experimentation with how a piece of software interacts with its user or its player can yield amazing results while still proving a point or making a statement. It may not be perfect, but because of how much effort was put into these varied bits of dickery, I have to call it a work of art.